A woman secretly follows her husband, who claimed to be working late, only to find him being intimate with a female colleague. At first, the woman couldn't believe her eyes, but the next moment, the woman first collapsed to the ground, crying uncontrollably. After composing herself, she walked straight into the hotel. She tricked the front desk into giving her the room number and headed upstairs. Just as she reached the door, she heard her husband working hard inside. Anger surged within her, and she grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, ready to break in. The words of the mother and son brought the woman back to her senses. She couldn't let this family be destroyed, but she couldn't swallow her anger either. So, she decided to take revenge in a different way.
民主路楚雄大厦正对面的巷子里，桃园宾馆206房间，有人正在卖淫嫖娼。
In less than 3 minutes, the police arrived at the hotel. The woman, who had just left in a taxi, broke down in tears. She didn't sleep at all that night, unable to understand how her usually timid husband could do such a thing. If she hadn't married him, he might have remained a poor country boy his whole life. Polly, who had been beautiful since childhood, had many suitors. But she chose Ma Shuiwu, a rural man, because of his high education and good character, which compensated for her lack of education. As a city woman, Polly always felt superior at home. Gradually, she became more domineering, treating Ma Shuiwu like a subordinate every day. A few days ago, Ma Shuiwu, who had been performing well, was promoted to workshop director. The factory allocated them a new apartment. Moving should have been a joyous occasion, but early in the morning, Bali started arguing with the movers. It turned out that the alley they lived in was too narrow for the moving truck to enter. The movers wanted extra money, which Bali saw as extortion and scolded them harshly. Ma Shuiwu, curious about the commotion downstairs, peeked out but quickly pulled back when he saw Bali. After paying the extra money, Bali began nitpicking, complaining that items were placed crookedly or that the floor was dirted. Her husband, who had just entered the house, quickly took off his shoes in fear. Feeling a bit guilty, Ma Shuiwu offered the movers a pack of cigarettes and asked his son to buy them some soda. Bali, hearing this, stormed out angrily, slapped the cigarettes out of her husband's hand, and started accusing him. She said he had been silent when they demanded extra money, but was now trying.
汽水不要钱，你当时在厂里搞招待呀你！
Ma Shuiwu didn't dare to say a word while being scolded. Even the movers couldn't stand it. They thought, even though we do manual labor, our wives are still kind and gentle. You seem like a cadre, but your wife is like this. Are you going to be controlled by such a woman for your whole life?
真的挺可怜的。
Polly heard it and rushed out again. They insisted on teaching them a lesson. That evening, the family celebrated their housewarming. Polly excitedly raised her glass, but her husband drank on his own.
别高兴，随便你怎么样，我不跟你吵。
When it was time to sleep, Ma Shuiwu remained silent. He was waiting for Bali to apologize, but to his surprise, Bali didn't apologize at all.
大男人这么小心眼儿。
At this moment, Ma Shuiwu couldn't hold back any longer. He finally expressed the thoughts he had been holding back for so long.
跟你离婚。
It was the first night after moving into the new house. Polly didn't understand what she had done wrong. A few days later, she confided in her best friend. Since her husband filed for divorce, he had been leaving early and coming home late every day, either claiming to work overtime or entertaining clients. He even slept on the couch in the living room. Polly started crying sadly as she spoke. Her best friend comforted her, saying, "Men are just like that. If you don't want to keep him, just hold on to the bank book and house deed and let him go. If you want to keep him, find a way to keep him by your side." Ma Shuiwu is not idle either. He has taken a liking to a young and attractive female colleague at the factory. She is not only beautiful with a great figure but also speaks gently and is very understanding. Only in front of her does Ma Shuiwu feel like a real man. So, whenever he has time, Ma Shuiwu looks for opportunities to invite her to dinner. Since talking with her best friend, Polly seemed like a different person. No matter how late it was, she would wait for her husband to come home and leave enough food for him. Looking at their once happy photos, Polly called her son over. When Ma Shuiwu came home from work, Polly started to be very attentive, either taking off his shoes and socks or bringing him foot wash water. However, Ma Shuiwu was not appreciative. Polly got up helplessly and then gave her son a look.
别生妈妈的气了，你别再睡沙发了。
Unexpectedly, this touched he angrily hid in the bathroom.
哭什么哭？就知道哭啊你！你别去！
Hearing the noise outside, Ma Shuiwu felt a sharp pain in his heart. The next day at work, he met his understanding female colleague again. Unexpectedly, she remembered that today was his birthday. Even his wife at home often forgot his birthday. This made Ma Shuiwu like her even more. So after work that day, he called Bali and said he had to work late. After hanging up, Bali felt something was wrong. No matter how late he came home before, he never called ahead. Today, this felt like a cover-up. I want to see what you're up to. When his son finished school, he arranged for him to stay at his godmother's house and then went to the factory gate to wait. Everyone was eager to go home after work, and Ma Xiaowu was no exception. Seeing Ma Xiaowu leave, Polly quickly ran after him, leading to the scene at the beginning. Polly was heartbroken and initially wanted to catch them in the act. But thinking of her 8-year-old son at home, she decided on a different way to get revenge. The police arrived and caught Ma Xiaowu and his female colleague in the act. After investigating at the factory, the police didn't punish them, but Ma Xiaowu couldn't keep his supervisor position. At this point, Ma Xiaowu just hoped his wife would ask for a divorce, but unexpectedly, she was unusually forgiving. This made Ma Xiaowu feel like he had done something wrong. He could only follow Bali home, feeling dejected. From then on, Bali returned to her previous arrogant self. She would either scold her husband like a child in front of her friends or make veiled insults in their presence. The harsh words were unbearable. Even her best friend couldn't stand it. She advised Polly to give her husband enough face in front of others. Polly felt it wasn't her fault at all. When her mother passed away, Ma Xiaowu had knelt down and promised to take good care of her for life. But now, he did such a thing. Her best friend told her that Ma Xiaowu was driven to this point by her. Days went by uneventfully until one day, when Polly came back from grocery shopping, she found that her husband had brought his mother over. When they met in the elevator, Polly turned her head away in annoyance, her face long enough to tie a cow. As soon as they got home, she called Ma Xiaowu into the room. Ma Xiaowu explained that since his father had passed away early and his mother was old with no one to take care of her, he, being the only child, decided to bring her over after they got a new house. He didn't discuss it with Polly, because he feared she would disagree. Polly was furious upon hearing this. She started bringing up old issues again. The old lady overheard their conversation clearly. While they were cooking, she picked up her bag and left. Ma Xiaowu hurriedly ran out to find her. The old lady was sitting on the steps, crying sadly. She never imagined her son would end up like this. To avoid causing trouble for her son, she decided to return to her hometown. In the end, it was Xiaobao who found his grandmother and brought her back home. With no other option, Polly set up a folding bed in her son's room. Throughout the process, Ma Xiaowu remained silent. He felt suffocated in this house, which made him think of his understanding female colleague. The next day at work, he found his female colleague again and confessed his feelings to her sincerely. Unexpectedly, her attitude took a 180-degree turn. Ma Xiaowu, who is no longer the director in the eyes of his female colleagues, he was already nothing. When Ma Xiaowu hurriedly arrived at the factory, he received even worse news. The factory director came over and told him that he was on the first list of layoffs. The reason for his layoff was also very simple. For the sake of the factory's image, he became the one to be laid off. Ma Xiaowu seemed lost, as if his soul had left him. In just a few days, he lost his home, his love, and his career. In the pouring rain, the new factory director came to find Bali. Seeing the police in the office, Bali thought her husband had been arrested again. But what she received were Ma Xiaowu's belongings. In his suicide note, he expressed guilt for not being able to take care of his mother and regret for not being able to watch his son grow up. However, he did not mention Bali at all. He harbored endless hatred for Polly. The factory director thought he was upset about losing his job. His mother believed he shouldn't have come from the countryside. Polly didn't shed a single tear from start to finish. When Ma Xiaowu was pushed into the cremation furnace, Polly turned to the old lady and said, "The son punches and kicks Polly." Polly's best friend came to comfort her, saying that if she wanted to cry, she should just let it out. But Polly didn't think it was worth crying over him. She couldn't understand why, ever since they moved to the new house, Ma Xiaowu first asked for a divorce and then jumped into the Yangtze River. Why did this happen? Her friend suggested it might be the house's bad feng shui. There are 7 or 8 roads passing under the building, which in feng shui is called 1,000 arrows piercing the heart. Living in such a house brings bad luck. But Polly didn't believe in such superstitions. There are many people living in the building and not every family is having problems. If something goes wrong, it's called 1,000 arrows piercing the heart. Her best friend couldn't say anything more. At home, there was only an elderly person and a child left. To support the family, Bali quit her job selling socks at the market and started carrying a shoulder pole. Although it was tough and exhausting, it paid well. After a long day of hard work, she would often fall asleep on the sofa as soon as she got home. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. At just 40 years old, Bali looked like an old woman. Her once black hair was now streaked with white, and she had become thin and dark-skinned. Fortunately, her son Xiaobao was very promising, always ranking first in his grade. Whenever Bali talked about her son with her fellow workers, her face would light up with happiness. Her colleagues believed that Bali could look forward to enjoying the fruits of her son's success.
大学4年，光学费多少钱？还不算生活费。万一他再考个研究生啊、博士啊，还不得勤巴苦。
Just as the two were chatting, a thug who had just been released after 10 years in prison walked down the street. The big sister saw him, greeted him, and quickly slipped away. Polly, however, was not afraid and asked the thug about his future plans. He replied, "I'm going to make a comeback." The college entrance exams are approaching. Polly wanted to check on Xiaobao's studies, but Xiaobao responded impatiently.
除了作业做完了没？作业做完了没？你还会不会说点别的呀？
Uneducated Polly didn't know how to respond. The old lady advised her to just not affect the child's mood. Polly quietly closed the door. A few days later, she ran into a thug on the street. The thug had gotten a van and said he planned to start a logistics business with his friends. Polly casually brushed her hair, thinking that maybe a bad boy like him was what she thought a man should be. That evening at dinner, her mother-in-law told Polly that Xiaobao would be 18 right after the college entrance exams. "You're an adult now. I've seen all your hard work over the years. When Xiaobao goes to college, if you want to find someone else, I won't oppose it." But this house was left by Ma Xiaowu. Take some time to transfer the house to Xiao. After hearing this, Bali didn't say anything more. Instead, she closed the door. That night, Polly went out to run some errands and happened to encounter a thug. The thug insisted on driving her home. Polly didn't refuse, but the thug drove to a secluded place and started to make advances on her. Polly resisted a little but then gave in. The college entrance exam is just 2 days away. Polly plans to stay home for a few days, not only to cook some nutritious food for the baby, but also to let Grandma rest for a couple of days. However, Grandma tells her that her constant presence in the room affects the baby's mood. She suggests Polly go out for a few days and come back after the college entrance exams are over. After hearing this, Polly quickly left the room. On the way, she heard that the thug had a car accident. With nowhere else to go, she went to the thug's house. Firstly, she could find a temporary place to stay. Secondly, she could take care of the injured thug. The two then started living together as a couple. The night before the college entrance exam, Polly was giving a back rub to a thug when little Bao came looking for her in the pouring rain.
这在这里，奶奶病了，你还在。
"You're still here playing." Seeing Polly's expression, the kid casually said 2 words, "Disgusting." Unexpectedly, this angered the thug, who insisted on teaching him a lesson. No matter how much Polly shouted, it was useless. She had no choice but to grab a bottle. The younger brother downstairs heard the commotion and rushed up. Polly shielded her son while pleading with the thugs to let them go. Polly's actions intensified Xiaobao's resentment. Fortunately, the incident didn't affect Xiaobao's mood, and he became the top scorer in the city's college entrance exam. The peers all teased that the top scorer's mom must treat everyone to a meal. Polly happily agreed, but soon she couldn't stay happy. That night, Xiaobao asked Polly to come home for dinner. It was the first time in 10 years that her son had asked her to come home. Polly was overjoyed and didn't know what to do. Xiaobao first brought out a photo of Ma Xiaowu and solemnly offered a toast to him. Then he toasted Polly.
我敬你。
"After we finish this drink, you will no longer be my mother." Polly looked incredulous. She couldn't believe her ears.
你说什么？
Xiaobao said it was her fault that he had been without a father for 10 years. Now that he has grown up, he doesn't need her anymore. The house was left by his father, and he wants her to move out. Polly gave a bitter smile upon hearing this. She thought her 10 years of hardship were finally over, but it turned out to be the day her son felt relieved.
你跟你爸爸一样没良心，不会走的。
Polly once again confides in her best friend, who reiterates that it's all due to the house's bad feng shui. Polly still refuses to accept her fate. "If he wants to fight over the house, then I'll fight to the end." That day, she called her son to the rooftop and slapped him as soon as they met.
马文昭，我生你养你，大半辈子都是为你活的，你有。
"If you still have a conscience, I'll pretend you didn't say anything yesterday. Regarding the house, I consulted a lawyer. Even if you go to court, you won't win." When the son showed a photo of Ma Xiaowu's female colleague, Polly couldn't stay tough anymore. The son found a photo in Ma Xiaowu's book and used it to locate a female colleague. She told him that the last time she saw Ma Xiaowu was the day he jumped into the river. She mentioned that a woman had called the police, and she suspected it was Bali. Ma Xiaowu was stunned. He took the photo to the hotel front desk and confirmed that Bali had indeed reported him to the police. Overwhelmed with despair, Ma Xiaowu felt utterly hopeless. At home, Bali made him feel worthless, and at the factory, she ruined his reputation. With nothing left to live for, Ma Xiaowu went to the Yangtze River Bridge, wrote a suicide note, and jumped off. As for why Ma Xiaowu didn't mention Bali in his suicide note, it's because he believed Bali not only ruined his life, but also pretended to forgive and tolerate him, which he found extremely insidious. In little Bao's heart, his father was always the gentle man who taught him math. Polly couldn't believe the absurd reason behind Ma Xiaowu's decision to jump into the river. She refused to accept that she was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Her son's hatred broke her heart even more. She couldn't understand why she, who had endured the most suffering, was blamed and hated by everyone, including the son she had raised with so much effort. She broke down. Even the strong Polly, who could support the entire family, finally broke down. She sat by the river, lost in thought, with brilliant fireworks lighting up the sky behind her. Polly's face was covered in tears. Suddenly, a young man approached her, calling her Granny and asking for a photo. Polly suddenly felt old. The young man was celebrating someone's birthday, full of exuberance and youthful energy. She realized how freely these kids laughed, and how her own son had never laughed so wildly. He always seemed to have a heavy burden on his heart, not like a child at all. That night, Polly sat alone by the river. At dawn, she returned home as usual. Once home, Polly calmly started packing her things and handed the house deed to her mother-in-law, hoping that Xiaobao would transfer the ownership when he had time. The grandmother advised that Xiaobao was too young to understand now, but one day, he would recognize her again. Polly gave a tired smile.
是我走以后，他能像别的孩子那样高兴，那样玩，叫我干什么都可以。
Time has turned the once young and beautiful Polly old, and her stubbornness has led her to believe that all her misfortunes are due to bad Feng Shui, a heart-piercing curse.
我的孩子好像从来没像别的孩子那样疯啊心。要是当年马学武跟我提离婚的时候，说不定没这么多的事儿，大家都过得蛮好的。
Polly picked up her luggage and left the new home she had lived in for 10 years without leaving a word for Xiaobao. When the thug heard Polly was moving out, he immediately drove to the building and started coaxing her into the car with a cheeky smile. Under the gangster's coercion, all the luggage was loaded into the car. Before leaving, Polly looked up at the house she had lived in for 10 years one last time. What she didn't know was that her son had witnessed everything from a distance. However, he didn't step forward to say a word. The film Falling Arrows is very realistic, depicting the helplessness of a messy marriage. The husband, Ma Xiaowu, seems pitiful but is actually selfish and cowardly. The wife, Baoli, appears strong but is also stubborn. Their young son lacks the ability to distinguish right from wrong, only knowing how to act recklessly. He ends up hurting his mother, who loves him the most, with his harsh actions. After watching the entire film, you're left with a deep sense of suffocation and powerlessness. This is reality. This is marriage. It's hard to say who's right or wrong, and everyone seems pitiable in their own way. How can one find hope and love amid such chaos? This is a lifelong challenge for many. I hope everyone finds a good partner and is treated sincerely. Don't be harsh and drive away your loved one. Don't be selfish and cowardly, leaving your loved one to face life alone.
宝莉，就当这儿只有我们两个人。
Looking forward to our next meeting.